I am Christine Chen. I work for Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario as the prevention consultant in the GTA. Wanted to have and do a shout out to Professor Elizabeth Podnex. I know you're there. Thank you for joining us. Elizabeth is the founder of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, and she is a pioneer and she knows so much about elder abuse, and yet she takes the time to support and join us. So thank you, Elizabeth. I know you are very busy writing book chapters and so on. Patrick Slaney, you are our volunteer, have been for more than 15 years now, so thank you. You know you mean a lot to us. Welcome everybody to our webinar. We cannot hear or see you, so all with video and audio have been muted. Happily, the webinar will be recorded and the slide deck as well will be available on our website really soon. Delighted to have Chris Chiarelli today as the sign language interpreter. Thank you, Chris. Mary Shakuri, my colleague, she is the Q&A queen for today. She'll be managing your questions. So type in your questions in the Q&A box. The chat box you can use to post any comments or insights that you want to share with everyone. You will get an evaluation survey after the webinar, so please fill that in. We really appreciate your feedback. Today's webinar and the webinar series has been a collaboration between Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, FARFO, and Senior Pride Network. For those who do not know, Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario is a not-for-profit provincial organization funded by the Ontario Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility. We implement the Ontario strategy to combat elder abuse, and we do that through public education sessions, service provider training, as well as community coordination. FARFO is the voice of Francophone seniors 50 years and older in Ontario. They do a wonderful work. They have individuals and social clubs as members. They isolation and cultural programs. And we have Olivier Lachatte here today with us. Hi, Olivier.
Hello, Christine. Hello, everyone. Always a pleasure.
Olivier has been running the French webinars this week. Also will be posted on our website if you missed it. Senior Pride Network is a volunteer-run association of individuals and groups who are united on the goal of expanding programs and services for queer trans seniors. This is the beginning of the beginning because we're continuing to start to look in the queer trans space to see how we can reduce abuse and neglect. Next month, for example, on November the 23rd, we will be having a very interesting conversation with Two-Spirit Elder Mani and Ashley Moreau, and it's called Respecting Elders and Preventing Abuse. I invite you to come back to join us. Do interact with us through Twitter and Facebook, email us. We really loved hearing from you. And now I'm delighted to introduce to you Anthony. Anthony Mohamed is the chair of the Education Committee at Senior Pride Network. He has also been at St. Michael's Hospital since 1995 as Senior Specialist, Equity and Community Engagement, Quality and Performance. You know, Anthony has so many hats that if you want to read his full bio, please go ahead. It's available on our, I think it's available on, well, you have seen it on the invite or the registration form. So look at his full bio there for all the hats that he wears. The other exciting speaker for today is Heather Hay. Heather is a veteran in elder abuse. She's a writer, educator, human rights activist. She's currently still coordinator for Elder Abuse Prevention Muskoka, and she has served as president of Fierté Canada Pride. Welcome, Heather, and welcome, Anthony.
Thank you so much. I believe that there are some concerns about the ASL interpretation.
Yes, if I can say something to the participants, you can deal with the display settings.
So good afternoon, everybody. I don't know, can you hear me? Am I on and is the screen showing? If that could be. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt, Anthony. I hope everybody can see the ASL interpreter now. you should be able to manage the display settings on the top right corner of this Zoom window, and you have to select gallery mode. Then you will see every speaker and the ASL interpreter on the right. So, and if you need, you can still reduce the window displaying the slide so you can see more the speakers and the ASL interpreter. Thank you, and sorry for the interruption, Anthony.
Oh, no worries at all. So I'm going to begin, but I would like to give Heather the opportunity to say some words of welcome if she'd like.
Just very excited to be here today and be a part of this exciting project.
Great. Okay. There we go. What happened? There we go. All right, so we'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So where I am here in the city of Toronto, I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis, settler, and newcomer communities. And nowadays, we all have a responsibility as caretakers of the land. And the little bit of education piece that I always like to include with every land acknowledgement that I'm a part of is that Toronto, the city of Toronto itself, is covered by Treaty Number 13. And this was done between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And an interesting fact is it was drafted in 1787, but it took over 200 years for that particular one to be settled. And many treaties across Canada are not settled, are still in negotiation. So it's an interesting process of how we share the land, how we acknowledge the land, and how we create this atmosphere of reconciliation among people. Heather, would you like to add anything?
We'd like to invite everybody to enter into the chat section there, the land that they're currently under, or the land that they're currently on, or the relationship to the land, and the treaty that they're governed by.
That would be wonderful. In fact,
so I don't know if people can.
When Heather and I spoke ahead of time, she had suggested that we do this as part of the land acknowledgement. And I thought, wow, what a great idea. Except I realized that I had to look into it myself and find out that we were on Treaty 13. So it's actually a great learning experience if you're non-Indigenous or not involved with the treaties and with what's going on across Canada. So thank you for that. All right, so what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover the what's often referred to as the alphabet soup. What does 2SLGBTIQQA seniors refer to? So who are we talking about? What is elder abuse and how it affects these communities? Some specific considerations for queer and trans seniors. We'll also present some related resources, and hopefully we'll get to know each other a little bit more. Both Heather and I, this is actually the first time we're interacting apart from a telephone call. So so I look forward to getting to know her, but also we do have a few polls that we may or may not get to depending on time. And those polls are completely anonymous. There's no recording of who pressed what, so feel free to share whatever you're comfortable with. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to put them in the chat so we can hopefully be able to summarize and address them as we move forward. All right, so this is going to be a quick and a quick introduction to the different sexualities and identities that people have. These terms are very complex, and there's no way I can do them justice in 2 minutes. So please forgive me if I leave things out. But this is meant as an introduction, especially for people who are unfamiliar with queer and trans communities. So let's start through the alphabet soup quickly. So the 2S stands for two-spirit, and many indigenous communities across North America or Turtle Island have claimed this identity if they are LGBT and indigenous. It's important to note that not all indigenous people refer to them who are LGBT refer to themselves as two-spirit. What it refers to is, in many cultures and communities across North America, is that it's a person who has both a male and a female spirit. And traditionally, in many cultures, these individuals were actually revered and held in a place of prominence within the community. So as a result of that history, like I said, many Indigenous peoples who are LGBT have reclaimed that word to identify with, but many haven't as well. The next two, lesbian and gay, refers to people who are either women or men who, lesbian or gay, who form relationships both romantically and sexually with members of the same gender as themselves. And when I use terms like men or women, I'm talking about the more inclusive way of thinking about those. So including people like trans men and trans women, or people with who are male identified or female identified. So myself as a gay man, I form relationships with men who are male identified, whether or not they're trans men or cisgender men, who are that are either romantic or sexually involved. And similarly for women, that's the term lesbian. Bisexual is an older term that does refer to the binary of forming relationships with both men and women, but many bisexual people identify today as being able to form sexual and romantic relationships with people of any gender. Another term that sometimes you'll see with bisexual is pansexual, which just refers to the ability or the desire to be open to forming relationships with people of any gender. The next one is actually a big one. It's an umbrella term. It's transgender. And under the transgender umbrella, many different groups will fall under it. So people who are transsexual, these are people who identify with a gender different than the one assigned to them at birth. To the sex assigned to them at birth. So it's important to understand the difference between sex and gender here. Sex is usually referring to the equipment that you're born with and that's assigned at birth. And undersex are three separate groups, male, female, and intersex. However, gender on the other side, and I'll talk intersex in a minute, but under gender, it's much more fluid and there's a spectrum of genders that people can identify with. So transsexual people are people who may or may not begin a physical or expression appearance in a different gender than the one assigned to them at birth. And then there are people who used to be called transvestite, but they're the more common term these days is cross-dresser. And these are people who live or work part-time or full-time in an expression of gender are drag kings and drag queens who are just fabulous and who just want to play with these different stereotypical gender roles. And all of these groups and many others fall under the transgender umbrella. And it's so complex that we could do an entire workshop specifically towards transgender and transgender people. And I would definitely support that with trans-identified speakers. The next one is intersex, and these are people who are born with non-specific sex characteristics. So the old term used to be hermaphrodite, and it refers to Hermes and Aphrodite in Greek mythology, having a child who was both male and female at the same time. The term today is intersex, and there's actually a well organized community of intersex people across North America There's a famous researcher in Montreal who does lots of work around intersex communities, and I would encourage you to continue to learn. So the thing about intersex people is often the parents are asked to decide which gender, male or female, should the child live in as they grow up, and they may be faced with the decision to have surgery on the child. However, the advocacy around intersex communities is that the parents choose a gender but do not do anything. Choose a gender to raise the child, however, don't do anything to physically, and let the child, him or herself or their self, choose when they're of age. So that's intersex, and the next one is queer, which again is an umbrella term that's sometimes used to encompass all of the letters on the alphabet soup. And this is a term that was originally derogatory towards LGBT people. However, it's being reclaimed, and it's used often in academic circles to identify queer studies. Next one is questioning, and questioning is fairly obvious. It refers to people who are questioning their sexuality or their gender identity. The next one is asexual, and asexual refers to people who have a low or no desire to form sexual or romantic relationships with anyone of any gender. And the important thing to note with asexual people is sometimes they themselves consider themselves part of the LGBT broader community, and sometimes they don't. So it really depends on the individual involved. And then last but not least are allies. And allies are people who do not fall into any of the categories above there, but are very supportive of the advocacy work and of the community among queer and trans people. And then to define seniors, the reason why I have who are 45 to 60 plus is because there are many, many variables. For example, there's a group in Toronto called Prime Timers for older gay men, and their starting age is 45. And then the Senior Pride Network doesn't have a particular age. It's just anyone is welcome who's concerned about senior issues. So it's very hard to define who exactly is a senior, because traditionally, obviously, we associate it with 65 plus, but many elders refer to themselves as being elders, and they're younger than 65. Heather, anything to add there?
Thank you, Chris, for being here with us today.
No problem.
All right, so let's carry on. My part is to provide the definition of what is elder abuse. We've got the World Health Organization's definition: a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action occurring within any relationship where there is an expectation of trust, which causes harm or distress to an older person. And we'll go on to the next slide and actually talk about what kinds of elder abuse. Anthony, if you've got the
I'm trying.
slide.
Uh-oh.
Right?
Yeah, I am. There we go.
So the different types of abuse may include physical abuse. That's one that we sort of think of more readily, but psychological and emotional abuse, including diminishing identity, their self-worth. Sexual abuse, any kind of sexual assault or behavior without their full consent or knowledge. The most common form of elder abuse is financial abuse, misusing funds and assets without their full knowledge, consent, or in that person's best interest. And then one that we're often, we sometimes forget is the neglect, intentionally withholding or not providing basic necessities of care. And sometimes that can be the withholding of medication, as well as not providing the services and support they need. And go to the next slide.
It's not moving forward. Sorry.
Okay.
There, they did it.
You got it?
You've got
Okay, my screen is not moving forward, but that's okay. So you can see the systemic barriers slide.
we've got the types of abuse is what's showing.
Yes.
There we go. Okay. There are some systemic barriers that are specific to queer and trans people. And one is profound invisibility, especially people who grew up in a time where they had to hide most of their life. They continue to hide in during as they age. And as a result, they may not, people who are working with them, people who are caring for them, even family members, may not even know that they're LGBT. And then even if they are out, often within the LGBTQ communities, there is a desire for youthfulness. And as a result, older LGBT people are even seen or not seen within our own communities, far less for the broader community. So that those issues of profound invisibility are very real. We talked about neglect already, but there's also discrimination and discomfort from people around them. And those types of discrimination, sometimes they're quite systemic in the sense of there may be policies in place or just a lack of desire to welcome people. And when I say policies in place, policies like around the family being defined as biological only and not chosen. And that's very important, right? Because relationships and chosen family is often the case within older LGBT people who may or may not have children or may have families who have left them. So that's just one example. But there's also issues that are more just along the lines of people who are working with LGBT people don't know what to do. And this is why I hope that we can continue this conversation well beyond this webinar. An example that we have at the Senior Pride Network that has come up is there's a trans woman who's in long-term care, and there are days when she wakes up and she forgets that she transitioned, and will ask the staff, where are her male clothes? Like, where are all her clothes? Because she opens the cupboard and she sees traditionally female clothing, and as a result, they're just not sure how to handle that. And it's an important thing, right, when it comes to comfort, both for the person providing care, but also for the person on the receiving end. She has dementia, so that's why she sometimes forgets. But like all issues of dementia, I would say follow those guidelines, but try not to add to the discrimination that trans people may face as a result of that. So relationships devalued, I talked about that, and family and self-advocacy can be very difficult. It can be very difficult if the person is not out. Okay. This was a study done in the United States in 2019, and I thought it was very good because it shows the vulnerabilities that increase the risk for abuse and reduce access to services for LGBT people. So I'm going to give you a second to look over it, but ostracism from the family due to their LGBT status sometimes gets exacerbated later in life with reduced access to caregivers. Prior abuse sometimes increases the risk of abuse. Increased prevalence of HIV sometimes leads to increased vulnerability due to, as I mentioned, cognitive impairment or physical issues. And the reason why that came up is because HIV played such a horrible it took such a horrible toll on our communities. I came out in the early 80s. myself. It was 1983 when I found Church Street in Toronto, and I saw, like, there were times when there was one funeral a month, and there was only one funeral home that would even accept bodies that had died from AIDS. So, like, the discrimination was tremendous at that time when it came to HIV, and we lost an entire generation. But what was amazing was that the community had come together and really fought, and a lot of people of all genders took care of mostly men who were dying, and it was an incredible thing to witness. There's income discrimination, as was mentioned, which could mean reduced access to housing and caregiving resources, poor interactions with law enforcement in the past, reduced likelihood of reporting acts of discrimination to law enforcement or with authorities in general. And then heteronormative experiences, and this refers to things that we do in long-term care homes or in other caregiving environments where we just make assumptions that everyone is heterosexual or should be heterosexual. And we use language like husband and wife, and without knowing the gender of the person or without knowing their sexuality. But as a result, a lot of older LGBT people may be reluctant to engage with traditional services. Let's see, where are we? Okay, so other issues queer and trans seniors may face is ageism and rejection from potential partners of all ages, which leads to extreme loneliness, low self-esteem as the body ages. As I mentioned, the body is often, there are many body image issues within the queer and trans communities for people of all ages. However, as the body ages and may fail in some ways as people might be susceptible to illness, it can impact their self-esteem. And trans people especially are likely to be victimized both within the community and the broader society. And it's been constant. Like this, I'm hearing about so many cases of trans women in the US who are being beaten up or murdered. And it's really very sad. Like not only sad, but anger provoking, and we need to do something to change this. And as you get older and your ability to fight back for yourself is impacted, it's especially necessary that we do something about it as a society. And then there are end of life issues, of course. So if you have dementia, estate planning, estranged biological family, no children, how do you move along these normal life paths when things look different from the rest of society?
I think some of the stories that that we've had within elder abuse situations is, you know, for example, somebody who's in long-term care getting treatment or personal support work might have someone decide that they need to pray over them prior to. Am I on? Because I'm not, okay. And we also have had situations where, because an older senior perhaps doesn't have children of his own, and other family members have decided to try and take the property away from them, you know, get them to sign it over into their name, and then sort of banish them out of their home and things like that. And even just personally, I found, you know, that what used to be just sort of me walking into a washroom might have somebody sort of start checking to see which door they were walking in. With some of the transphobia that's rising, not just in the United States, but in Canada here as well. Right now, the the response I'm getting is much more hostile and aggressive. Excuse me, aggressive. People will yell at me as I'm going into this is the women's washroom, that kind of thing. So the abuse can occur on a various levels.
So to be clear, the issue of prayer is not the issue of caring for somebody. It's the issue of assuming that um, that a person needs to change, needs to be different, and that God or a higher power can help you become different. The same discussion is happening across Canada right now in terms of the legislation that's popping up across Canada around conversion therapy and whether or not that's necessary. And the belief within the broader community is certainly that conversion therapy does so much harm and leads to so much um, self-hatred and suicide and homophobia or transphobia that it should not be allowed anywhere in Canada. So that's where that kind of sentiment comes from. But I also want to raise issues of intersectionality. Like, for example, when I come to the table, I bring my whole self to the table. So even though I identify as a cisgender gay man, um, I'm also a brown man. I'm also a person who speaks English. I'm a person who I have a good job. I mean, all of these kinds of things uh, give me, they form my identity. They form who I am. And when we talk about intersectionality, it's important that we understand issues of how race, for example, or gender or sex interact with our sexuality and our gender identity. And that's certainly the trend within the Canadian LGBTQ communities, is that we try to look at things more from an intersectional perspective, especially now that issues of legislation has happened. For example, we have protections in the Ontario Human Rights Code and protections in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms nationally. We also have same gender marriage. And so many battles, many former battles have been settled, but that doesn't mean that those issues have gone away. And I can tell you as a person, I was born in Trinidad and Tobago and we came in the 1960s to Canada. So basically I grew up in Canada, and when we were when I was called Packy in public school, I was able to run home and tell my parents, tell the teacher, talk to the student guidance counselor. There were lots of resources there. But then in high school, when I was called fag, there was no one to go to. In fact, I remember clearly running to the school guidance counselor and him telling me that he would get in trouble if he talked about issues of sexuality. And so there was nobody there to speak to. I even spoke to my pastor, and instead of helping me, he kicked me out of the church. And so here I am, 13 years old, and that's what happens. But imagine, let's compound that as we get older. And if you're coming out as an older person, going through all those things, and a lot of your power, a lot of your language, a lot of your currentness has been taken away, it becomes a real advocacy issue. And so there are intersections of race and sexuality that's important to acknowledge. Heather, what's it like in Muskoka? Anything?
I'd say,
I know you're up there.
you know, most rural communities are actually quite accepting. I think the problem is lack of services and support for us culturally and socially. You know, most of us have created social networks, but they're predominantly within the cis heteronormative world.
Right. But it's interesting what you say about how rural communities, which we often think of as being more homophobic or more transphobic than large urban centers, are actually quite accepting. Yeah. And that's been your personal experience? as well?
From my, well, I've had harder times within the queer community, local community, than I have within the broader community at large. More discrimination.
What do you mean
More
by
discrimination from the cis white men within our community, I would say, than within broader straight community.
So, meaning around gender, or around just the fact that you're a woman identified?
They have no interest or use for women generally, has been my experience locally. The older men, many of the older men have lived lives that do not include women on a regular basis within them, and so there's a lot of active misogyny within the community.
Yeah, that's not surprising, but it's also very upsetting, right? I mean, why is it that this community that is so diverse and so and we've all experienced level of discrimination, why haven't we come together as as one unit, is a big question. Because as I mentioned with the AIDS example, I remember clearly a lot of women coming together and forming those care teams when a lot of my friends were dying, right? I mean, and there was nobody giving care to these gay men who were dying. Very few hospitals were willing to accept the patients, and when they did, it was done with a lack of knowledge around how HIV was transmitted. So as a result, there was no touching, there was no hugging, and I saw these groups of women hugging and touching and holding the men as they died. And I don't think that that's been recognized within the broader gay male community. So I think what you're saying is completely accurate, in that a lot of people, there's a lot of discrimination both within the community, which is compounding the discrimination within the broader society that we all face. All right. Thank you very much for sharing that. All right, let's see. Can I go on? I'm trying. There we go. Okay, so in the chat, I was wondering if people would be willing to list 1 or 2 action items that might help, both individually or as a community, reduce and prevent queer and trans elder abuse. We're going to go through some points, but we're not going to be able to cover everything. And I'm sure there's a lot of knowledge among this audience that you can add to the discussion. So please, someone be brave and start putting some things in the chat. So let's move.
While people are listing that, somebody asked the question about why I think there's more discrimination against lesbians and dykes in particular. And I think it comes down to the misogyny within our broader community that has not been addressed at a bigger scale. And lesbians as not having power in terms of connection to a man through sex, either directly or through being related with a man, often are perceived as having less power.
Yeah.
Or use.
No, definitely. We live in a patriarchal society that's very hierarchical, and often when people think in the broader society of queer and trans communities, they'll sometimes think in terms of what that community can contribute. And I've often heard in meetings, etc., that, oh, there's a higher income among LGBTQ people, right? So therefore this and that. But because they're lumping us all into one, they're looking at often 2 male salaries together and thinking, oh, we can charge whatever. And an easy way to note that is look at any vacation destination and slap the word gay in front of it, and the price doubles compared to elsewhere, right? So society kind of looks at it. But what they miss in that formula is that often 2 women who have traditional women's salaries are not as well off, and there isn't financial independence. So a lot of things get buried as a result of the way we look at the queer and trans communities generally. So thank you.
Right.
For
So moving on to if I don't need to be no mansplaining. If an older adult tells you that they are being abused, this is sort of some of the tips that we want you to. How do you deal with it? Because we're always, afraid of somebody discloses. What is it we should do in that situation? So the first thing is really be patient. A lot of times, situations of abuse have developed over time. We find that they're often it's a caregiver or a family member that is the person doing the abusing. So often there isn't a quick fix to the situation. Sometimes there is. It's a staff situation, but often it's more within their ongoing living situation. So believe them and try not to judge them. They may choose to stay in the situation they're in. We've had a situation where a senior was ready we got them all set up, ready to go, had them go to a doctor's appointment, and had the police and housing all set there. All they had to do was declare that they needed a support, but they were afraid of being cut off from their grandkids, so they chose to stay in the situation. So even though they're entitled to live in the situation and to give their money away and live in as adults, and so it's sometimes frustrating because there isn't a elder abuse law, although that was promised in the throne speech. So changing in an abusive relationship is really different, extremely difficult. Don't deny what's going on. Don't confront the perpetrator yourself. Educate yourself on the resources that are available. Encourage them to seek help. And one of the things that I like to do is encourage them to start making decisions, whether it's small, where would you like to go for lunch? Those kind of decisions will help them start making the bigger decisions to access help if they need it. And we've got the seniors safety line is there. If you call the 1-800 number there, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can find help. Although I have to say that sometimes if you were to call in Muskoka, that number will eventually get you to me. And the funding that we currently have with Muskoka Elder Abuse for our ongoing funding is for approximately 4 hours a week. So without core funding, it's very difficult to provide the level of support that people require.
I'd like to add that this topic, elder abuse prevention, is not new for me, but the resources. So as I was preparing for this, I looked into the resources, and I'm shocked at the little bit of funding that Ontario dedicates to elder abuse generally. And it's quite amazing that as the population is aging and getting older as a society, that we just don't have the right resources to help people. So I'm not sure if anyone can comment, maybe Christine or Heather, a little further on the resource issue.
Why don't we let Christine handle what Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario is able to provide, because they have far more resources.
Thank you. We will cover that in the question and answer period. Okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So we're going on to the long-term care. That there is a duty to report. There's a duty to report, but we don't know how long and what kind of investigations there was a limit to how many people were employed to conduct the investigations properly. So yes, there is a duty to report whether you're in long-term care or in a residential retirement home. There is a duty to report if there's any abuse of a resident within that facility. And you can see they've got the different types of the actual legislation. One of the things that happens within long-term care homes is grooming. Oftentimes it won't necessarily be a staff member, but it might be somebody who comes in, starts volunteering, helping out, go gets an errand, builds a relationship, and next thing you know, they've got a lawyer coming in, changing the powers of attorneys and the wills for an individual. So that's sometimes, so if somebody's aware of something like that happening within a facility, there is a duty to report.
Okay, so we'd also like to direct, oh, sorry. Yeah, we'd like to direct your attention to some of the resources that are available to you. So below are the 3 organizations that are sponsoring this series, this particular series. But of course, there's also Heather's organization in Muskoka, which we'll have on the next slide. But Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, FARFO, la Fédération des aînés et des retraités francophones de l'Ontario, and Senior Pride Network of Toronto. But there's also Senior Pride networks throughout the province, in Ottawa region, in Kingston, in Niagara, and in the Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo area that I know that are quite organized. And I believe there's some work in Thunder Bay even. So if anyone is looking for that, let's see. But these could be starting points. Okay. Heather, did you want to point out any of these ones?
These are just some additional resources available that you can pull off the slide if you're looking for specific information. Rainbow Health Ontario provides a lot of health-related information. If you're concerned about a senior and whether or not they're being, their legal rights, the Advocacy Center for the Elderly is an excellent resource, as well as the various Pride networks and Anthony's network there as well.
There we go. I definitely want to draw your attention to the last one, which is Rainbow Health Ontario, and that's a great resource bucket. It has a whole bunch of links to other organizations and a lot of guides on how to care for specific situations with specific populations within the queer and trans community. All right. These are a few videos. I'm not sure, we actually have a little bit of time. So we could, in fact, show one.
Can we do the questions? I think people have asked questions.
Oh,
and
yes.
I'd rather
yes,
go to the questions than videos.
Okay,
by
so
all
the
means.
links
Okay, so the links are here.
so feel free to watch them.
Feel free to watch.
They're all from Simon Fraser University.
Simon Fraser University.
They're quite good scenarios.
They're quite good
as you can see,
scenarios,
very short.
as you can see.
We've got a feedback loop going.
Anthony, if I may just make a comment. It's Christine from Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. Just wanted to remind everyone that we have these wonderful local elder abuse networks that are connected to Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. And Heather is actually the chair of the Muskoka Prevention Network. So wherever you are in Ontario, there should be a local network that you can join and be a part of. Those are experts from a range of organizations that have got together, and they do awareness building, they do some case consultations, and a whole lot of activities. So please send us an email. We can connect you with your closest network. Okay, I think, Heather, you're right. Let's go to the questions. Mary, may I invite you to turn your camera on and lead the question?
Perfect, thank you. I just didn't know if you wanted to do the poll first, but we can definitely dive into the questions. So first question that had come up was talking about, do we have any stats for suicide rates in 2SLGBTIQQA plus communities, really with seniors in the population, and specifically looking at that with long-term care homes?
That would be something Elder Abuse Ontario. Rayanne might know more of the research piece. I'm not aware of it myself.
Okay. And that's something
unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, there are no statistics specifically to LGBTQ seniors. However, there are broad statistics about the queer and trans communities, and there's also a lot of research around LGBT youth, but not specifically to
seniors, and especially in LTC and what that may look like. Something definitely very interesting to probably look at for the future and analyzing and speaking with LTC. Definitely, thank you. That was an excellent question. Comment and sort of question here, someone had said, I'm curious about the instance about including allies in the alphabet soup acronym. CIS straight people do not face the same barriers and do not need to be taking up space in QT communities.
For sure, and I completely understand and acknowledge that point of view. The reason why I personally had included allies in the acronym was to be inclusive, and so that when people see the AA at the end of the acronym, they actually know who we're referring to. That said, there are many allies who are cisgender and who are heterosexual, who, while not having the same experience as queer and trans people, they can certainly be empathetic, supportive, and use the different privileges that people have in order to support the work that's being led by the LGBTQ communities. So it's an ongoing discussion and debate. And it's not specific to the LGBT communities. I know within the people of color communities, we talk about that all the time. You know, how much space should white people be playing a role, even though they're supportive of the goals of reducing racism? How do you reduce racism in a way that people of color take the lead? And I think the similar discussion has to happen within the LGBTQ community.
Excellent, thank you. And Wendy just wrote in the chat, excellent explanation. Thank you, Anthony. Next question is about denying access and not allowing contact with grandchildren. So what does that perhaps look like?
So the senior in that particular situation was living with an extended family, and the situation was they were being locked in a room. They had no access to the kitchen, were only allowed to bathe very frequently. So a caregiver managed to create a situation where they had to go in for a test at the hospital so that we could get them out, because they kept saying, help me, please get me out of here. But once they were actually given the opportunity to leave that situation, they said their concern about declaring what the abuse was to the police was that they wouldn't have access to their grandkids anymore. And so it was worth it to them to stay in the situation, just so they had access to the seniors.
Excellent, thank you. And of course, definitely some concerns and vocalization about saying, are people reporting through the Long-Term Care Home Act? And we know, of course, that act has been duplicated by the retirement homes. But if they are seeing abuse, are they reporting? That's maybe a little more difficult to answer if we don't know if they are fully reporting. Any comments, Anthony or Heather?
I know that I'm getting calls, but part of the problem is a lot of times people don't want to, they're afraid of repercussions. So if it's resident against resident or a particular staff person, they're really afraid of, any changes to their environment and stuff, so they're the emphasis to report, it's really tough for seniors to make that stuff.
Very true. Thank you. And just in a quick summary, Anthony, when you sort of asked everyone to chime into the chat about what needs to change or what we need, I think the 3 key was definitely education, awareness, having open conversations. And just to flip back, somebody said, about just saying to someone, sometimes, we always want to say, I understand, but sometimes you can't really understand what someone is going through unless, you're in that same journey. So it's more just to sort of really listen and be, compassionate and caring what they're going through, but maybe saying I understand may not be the proper terminology to use.
And sometimes it's just about letting them know they have a choice. That you do have some choice here, and just being the person that they can offload some of their feelings about it and make them more comfortable in the choice that they're making, whatever that might be, and supporting them.
Excellent. Perfect. Okay. And I know someone had just asked about seeing the links again for the YouTube links that we had put up, but we're going to let everyone know we are recording the webinar. It will be available shortly on our Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario website, and then you can view it, download it at your leisure